WNYC Studios is supported by Geico. Do you own or rent your home? Sure you do. Fortunately, Geico makes it easy to bundle your home and car insurance. It's a good thing, too, because having a home is hard work. Go to geico.com, get a quote, and see how much you could save. Geico.com. Easy.
Mudslinging, mayhem, and a Roman emperor with a broken heart.
Where do I go? What do I do? Who will help me?
It's Handel's Agrippina on the latest episode of Aria Code. Listen to Aria Code wherever you find your podcasts.
Listener supported. WNYC Studios.
It's the Brian Lehrer Show on WNYC. Good morning, everyone. Just another sleepy few days of not much going on since we last spoke. I was off yesterday for Yom Kippur, 1 day of atoning for a whole year worth of sins. It's a pretty good deal, actually. So just since Friday, we have a new Supreme Court nominee, and the New York Times has more than 15 years of data from President Trump's tax returns. And, oh, by the way, there will be a presidential debate tonight. Andy Borowitz in The New Yorker, in his satire column, published this fake headline. Trump plans to use debate to deduct Biden as a dependent. Trump would explain to the IRS that the reason Joe is doing so well in the polls is that people hate me. That means he is totally dependent on me. To be clear, as Borowitz always is, that is satire, not real. But the line these days can be blurry, as with many things in the real-life tax returns, like deducting part of Ivanka's pay as an outside consultant fee, even though she was a full-time employee of Trump's company. And the world last night officially hit 1 million coronavirus deaths. The U.S. has 206,000 of them. So we have 4% of the world's population and more than 20% of the world's deaths. We'll talk more later in the show about who lives, who dies, and who cares. There are also some spikes in new cases in parts of the New York City area now, and we'll have the city councilman, Mark Traeger, from one of those Brooklyn zip codes later in the show. We'll also have Andrew Weissman today, a lead investigator, as some of you know, from the Robert Mueller team and from the Justice Department for many years, whose specialties include financial fraud. So we'll get Andrew Weissman's take on Trump's tax returns and Russia. With me now, Politico White House correspondent Nancy Cook. She has previously been a healthcare reporter for Politico, relevant with the Affordable Care Act becoming one of the main battlegrounds in the Amy Coney Barrett confirmation battle. And Nancy used to work for Fast Company covering tax and business reporting, so lucky us with some tax expertise that she is here today. Thanks for coming on, Nancy. Welcome back to WNYC.
Oh, thanks for having me, Brian. I love your show.
Thank you. So your latest article out this morning is called Trump's Tax Troubles Couldn't Have Come at a Worse Time. Why do you say that?
Well, they're coming just at a moment when a lot of people feel like this is one of the last few times when Trump can really pull it together and try to surpass Biden in the polls and in these key battleground states. And what keeps happening to him is there are just bad headlines, bad events over and over again for him. He hasn't been able to settle on a message for Biden. And people are already starting to vote early. They're starting to vote via mail-in ballots. And I think people around the president are very worried that time is running out for him to establish any type of lead over Biden.
You suggest the Trump tax issue could neutralize any attack Trump makes on Hunter Biden, making a lot of money from Ukrainian and Chinese interests. Why would it do that?
Well, that's definitely what the Biden campaign is hoping. The president had really been planning for a long time to try to make Hunter Biden a key feature of this debate and really go after Biden for those sorts of activities. But I think the Biden people yesterday were very excited by the Trump tax story because they felt like it was a way that they could really talk with the average voter about the way that Trump has tried to use the government to his own advantage, paying only $750 in taxes in the year 2017. And I think that they will also talk about all the money that he's going to owe over the next few years and how that could be a potential national security risk if he is reelected president.
when Trump was running in 2016, obviously the Democrats didn't have this data yet, but still critics questioned Trump's aggressive use of tax deductions, which was known as a general thing. And he said it just shows he's smart about the tax code. Use the word smart. And doesn't everyone use whatever deductions the tax system allows? And he hasn't been charged with anything illegal. So do you expect to hear more of that kind of defense in the debate tonight? And if Trump uses that defense, how does Biden frame it as a big deal for voters?
Well, I think that how Biden frames it as a big deal for voters is basically by talking about, and we saw this in the ad that he already cut, by talking about how nurses, construction workers, students, people making $30,000 a year are paying more in taxes, most likely, than President Trump. And so I think that it will be a way for the Biden campaign to really talk about the effect of these sort of loopholes and the effect of President Trump. But it also, I think they're going to try to paint him as a con man, someone who for years has tried to act like he's a very wealthy, successful businessman, when in fact, part of that success or the mirage of success comes from minimizing his tax bill, taking on a lot of debt, and not necessarily knowing how that's always going to be paid. And a lot of times, historically, the president was bailed out by his father's own success, not his own. And so I think the Biden campaign will definitely seize on that in the debate and really get into it. And I think the Trump campaign yesterday, when I talked to people around the president and on the campaign, they really were all over the map on how to talk about the tax issue. The president, in his first debate in 2016 with Hillary Clinton, she brought up this very issue that she had a hunch that he had a low tax bill, and he said that he was smart. But yesterday, the campaign, they couldn't really figure out how to talk about it. They were saying, oh, well, some people are saying, oh, he's smart and he minimized his tax bill legally. The president himself on Twitter was saying, well, it's actually not true. I paid millions of dollars. Some people tried to paint this as sort of a scheme on the part of the Democrats to have negative information come out before the debate. But it was another instance in which the Trump campaign was really caught flat-footed by a bad headline. And they've really been struggling to figure out how to respond to it. And I'll be curious to see what message they alight on for tonight.
So listeners, do you care about Trump's tax information as published by the New York Times? If so, why? If not, why not? And we can also take questions for Nancy Cook from Politico on comments about the Amy Coney Barrett Supreme Court nomination. Take your comments or go ahead and pregame tonight's debate if you want to do that. 646-435-7280, 646-435-7280, or tweet a question or a comment at Brian Lehrer. Somebody already thinks he's a comedian out there. Nancy, I quoted Borowitz doing a little satire on this. So you know how Trump always likes to say, or his people like to say, that Trump owns the libs, right? He's always provoking liberals, and he gets them stuck in their own morass by provoking them. Trump owns the libs, right? So listener Eddie tweets, Trump is so broke he can only afford to rent the libs.
Good one.
So thank you, Eddie Brannon on Twitter. Here's what Biden said on MSNBC this weekend about preparing to debate Donald Trump in general.
It is going to be difficult. I know. My guess is it's going to be just straight attack. They're going to be mostly personal. That's the only thing he knows how to do. He doesn't know how to debate the facts because he's not that smart. He doesn't know that many facts.
There are so many examples of what Biden is talking about there, the personal attacks. One is this famous moment from 2016 when Hillary Clinton was questioning Trump's fitness to be in charge of the legal system.
It's just awfully good that someone with the temperament of Donald Trump is not in charge of the law in our country.
Yeah, because you'd be in jail.
Secretary Clinton.
And obviously, nobody charged her with anything. She's not in jail. She's not in danger of going to jail. So what's the 2020 version of that, and how do you think Biden would be prepping for that kind of thing?
Well, that's a great question. And I feel like the president actually has had a very hard time with this. He has had a very hard time defining Biden. He's tried a bunch of things like Sleepy Joe, lion hide in Biden. But he has had a very hard time settling on a message for Biden, and so has his campaign. And so I think that has been a real contrast with 2016, when basically Trump was able to conjure up a lot of negative ways to define Hillary Clinton. But also, if you remember, during the Republican primary in 2016, he dispatched with a bunch of his rivals by, making up catchy names for them. Low energy Jeb Bush. And he came up with all these names that kind of stuck and caricatured the people in some way. But he hasn't been able to do that with Biden. And so I think the biggest challenge for Biden tonight is to basically present Trump with facts about his own record and the way he's handled things like the coronavirus. I think that's going to be a key thing that the Biden campaign does. And then, the president tells lies all the time or gives inaccurate information. He said that yesterday when he was the only president who ever gave up his presidential salary. That's not true. So I feel like the president will be doing that a lot during the debate, and it will be up to Biden to, respond to it and fact check it, but also be able to get his own points in. I think that that's just a huge trick when you're dealing with Trump. He's not afraid to lie and put things out there, and it can be really hard for opponents to figure out how to respond.
By the way, listeners, we will have the debate here on WNYC. It's at 9 o'clock tonight, pretty late start. I guess that makes it 6 o'clock on the West Coast, so they hope that people will be home from work and stuff like that. So 9 o'clock. We have live coverage as the debate starts here on WNYC, followed by analysis from NPR afterwards. So you can get your debate audio here if that is how you want to get it. Earl in New Jersey, you're on WNYC. Hi, Earl. Earl,
how you doing?
You there? Hi.
Yeah, I'm here. Hi there. How are you?
Good. How you doing? You want
to
say
hear me? Okay.
Something about the tax returns?
Well, everybody has, tax returns, and unfortunately, I'm a painful Republican. I don't even know what you call it. I'm like a Republican in the capitalist aspect, because I'm a small businessman, and I believe labor should be paid well. And I do get some crazy deductions. Like, I just bought a truck, and they're like, "Oh, you could deduct the whole thing," and I would have reduced my tax burden. The government would have actually paid me money back. I'm like, no, just do it over 5 years instead of in 1 year, because the way they changed it. And so I can't fault him for that. All we can fault him for is whoever the accounting lobbies and lawyer lobbies that are paying for the crazy loopholes and tax bills that we have that the rich people take advantage of. If they ever went away, it would be much more fair. We would love to see rich people paying like they did in the 50s and 60s, and none of them closed their businesses up. They still kept operating. They still did stuff, and people made a decent living. My dad could support a whole family on just his salary alone, and nowadays, almost everybody needs two people. So wages haven't kept up.
So you'd rather see the tax code change, but in the meantime, while this is the tax code, you don't fault Trump too much for taking advantage of it as it's written.
How can I? I remember in 2016 when Bernie, I don't remember what his tax bill was, but I remember that somebody criticized him about paying low taxes. And he said, I'm using the tax bill to my advantage the same as anybody else would. And how can you fault them?
Bernie Sanders. Earl, thank you so much. Call us again. And interesting point. I hadn't thought of the Bernie Sanders example. I think that's an accurate quote. I don't know if you remember that or can fact check that. But it brings up kind of this balance. What will people resent more? Rich people getting away with things in the tax code, or the IRS itself?
Yeah, I talked with a bunch of tax attorneys yesterday because I was curious, how they viewed the bombshell New York Times story. And they said largely what the caller said to me. That's the president using the tax code legally in a way to minimize his bill. And lots of, wealthy people do it. Small business owners do it. It's perfectly legal. I think that the political risk to the president is that it just makes him appear wealthy, potentially out of touch with people, that he has this tiny tax bill while people who have much less money than him pay, much larger one. And the president has always tried to portray himself as an outsider of the political system and someone who is really, stands with the working class. And I think this shows the extent to which his own wealth has shielded him from things like paying taxes. And so I think that that's how the Biden campaign will use it. I think that, as the caller said, it's perfectly legal. A lot of people do it, but that doesn't mean that it doesn't carry political risk.
Also, a lot of rich people do pay a lot in taxes, right? When they debate whether there should be a tax hike on the rich in New York State, for example, Governor Cuomo and others who resist that will point out the top 1% pays 40% of the income tax in the state. I don't know if that's the actual number, but it's a big number. And yet Donald Trump didn't do that. So there are individual differences there. Diego in Sunset Park, you're on WNYC. Hi, Diego.
Thanks for taking my call. Yesterday you had the repeat of the show about socialism, creeping socialism. Well, this to me to be like reverse socialism, where me as a small business owner is paying more taxes than billionaire Donald Trump.
Mm-hmm.
And to go further, I mean, this Republican tax deal that they did penalizes all blue states. And I mean, I love you, Brian, and I listened to you for years, but that was malpractice on your part not to ask Nicole Malliotakis what she plans to do on salt. I mean, this is something that affects us.
Well, I don't want to get bogged down in the topic of SALT. That's the state and local tax deduction on your federal taxes. Couldn't ask Malliotakis or her opponent Max Rose everything about everything when they were here. But, there is a progressive position that supports not allowing people to deduct state and local income taxes beyond Trump's new $10,000 limit as a progressive measure. Like AOC takes that position, that beyond $10,000 in state and local income taxes, it becomes another tax advantage for the rich. So like I said, I don't want to get bogged down in that. I'm just saying there are two sides of that issue. But I appreciate your call. And Nancy, to his larger point, Diego says he's a small businessman and he doesn't have the tax loopholes to take advantage of as big business people do. And, the New York Times lead editorial on their own series was not so much about Trump this weekend. It was about the tax code. And so I wonder if Chris Wallace, moderating the debate tonight, is going to bring that up and take it to the issue, which is really what affects, a lot more people than how sleazy Donald Trump was or wasn't in his own tax life. There is an issue of the tax code, and I wonder if they're going to bring it up and make both sides debate that tonight and put Trump on the spot by saying, the tax code that gives me all these advantages should be changed, or defending it.
Yeah, if you remember in 2012, when President Obama was running for re-election against Mitt Romney, taxes and the way that they would handle taxes and how progressive the tax code would remain was just such a key issue. And there was, huge policy battles over it. I feel like, this election has been more about the coronavirus and also just more about both candidates personally, sort of who is better equipped to govern. But it's a great question. And if Chris Wallace brings it up, I think it would really bring to the fore, some key potential differences between how Biden and Trump would actually govern in the second term. The Trump White House, before the coronavirus, was thinking, for instance, about trying to do a whole nother round of tax cuts if he won re-election, and his economic team was working on that behind the scenes. Whereas I think if Biden is elected, there could be an entirely different conversation about taxes, potentially raising some taxes on very wealthy people. The Democrats are always eyeing the estate tax and changing the way that is structured. That's the money that people inherit and how that's taxed. So I think it would be a great question because it would actually draw out the policy differences, not just the personality differences between the two candidates.
Amy Cook, Nancy Cook, I should say, White House correspondent for Politico. See, my brain was one step ahead of my mouth because the next word out of my mouth is Amy Coney Barrett, the Supreme Court nominee. And you had an article just before the nomination called Trump Walks Abortion Tightrope on SCOTUS pick. Now, he has always promised to pick anti-Roe judges and justices. For example, this from 2016 during the campaign with Chris Wallace, who happens to be moderating tonight's debate.
Do you want to see the court overturn Roe v. Wade?
Well, if we put another 2 or perhaps 3 justices on, that's really what's going to be, will happen. And that'll happen automatically, in my opinion, because I am putting pro-life justices on the court. I will say this, it will go back to the states, and the states will then make a determination.
I am putting pro-life justices on the court. And when he says it will go back to the states, that means Roe would be overturned. That's what Roe is. It's a federal guarantee of abortion rights. And if Roe is overturned, it means the question of abortion policy goes back to the states. So when you write, Nancy, that he's walking a tightrope on the issue, what's the tightrope?
Well, basically what has happened is that the president was so open in 2016 about the fact that he only wanted, people who were against abortion put on the Supreme Court. And that was a key criteria for his justices. But the thing is, Republicans have been so coy about this. They don't like justices to talk about it. They think that it's a hot button issue. They don't want it out there. They want to sort of talk in much broader, lofty terms about, people who adhere to the Constitution, but they don't want to get into abortion because they feel like it, riles up both sides of the aisle, and they want to sort of downplay it so they can just get the justices through the confirmation hearings. And we saw that happen last week. The president himself sort of backpedaled on his earlier promise and was telling people that he did not ask Amy Coney Barrett about her views on abortion or overturning Roe v. Wade during the many hours that he spent with her last Monday and Tuesday, interviewing her at the White House. A lot of people around him said that wasn't for him to do. But meanwhile, there's a bunch of social conservatives and evangelicals and anti-abortion groups who want him to publicly say, no, this is a key thing. This is a criteria. And so I think that's the tightrope. The White House is trying to downplay it just because they're trying to do this confirmation fight so very quickly. And they don't want abortion to come up because they think it will slow things down. People will have questions, of course, as they should. But they do want the social conservatives really want that issue front and center because that is a key reason why they support Trump. There's a bunch of social conservatives and evangelicals and Catholics who didn't really like the president in 2016. They didn't like his rhetoric. They didn't like the thrice married thing. They didn't like the Hollywood Access tape, but they got behind him because of his Supreme Court list. And we've seen some of that support fall away in 2020. So this is a way for him to bring them back into the fold with this particular judicial nomination.
How much do you think the coming case on the Affordable Care Act, which the court will hear in just a matter of weeks, or just after the election, how much do you think that will be a centerpiece of the confirmation hearings?
I think it will be a centerpiece for the confirmation hearings because that is the Democrats' main line of attack, that it seems like to me, with Amy Coney Barrett. They really want to talk about how millions of people could lose health care in the middle of a pandemic if the Affordable Care Act is struck down. And I think that it's very likely that it would be struck down by the court if she's appointed and the court tilts right. And so you would have a ton of people losing insurance or potentially having COVID-19 count as a pre-existing condition, which would be wild. And so I think that is a really key message for them. Healthcare was such a potent message for the Democrats in 2018 during the midterms, and they're going to try to use that again this time in the confirmation hearings because they think that's a message that can appeal to all types of people. And I think it will be a real real conversation in the confirmation hearings.
We just have a couple of minutes left. Then we're going to have Andrew Weissman on, who was a top prosecutor in the Mueller investigation, and he's a financial fraud expert, and he's going to have a lot more to say about the tax returns. But about the timeline of the confirmation or the process, I'm seeing Monday, October 12th for the start of hearings, Thursday, October 22nd for a Senate Judiciary Committee vote, so I guess the following week for a full Senate vote, assuming all goes as Lindsey Graham and Mitch McConnell are laying it out. But October 22nd is also the night of the final presidential debate. Tonight's the first one. That's supposed to be the third one. So Lindsey Graham, the Judiciary Committee chairman, must think voting to confirm Barrett in committee that day is good for the president in that context. Should I read it that way? Maybe because it takes focus off the virus or anything else?
Well, I think that the White House definitely feels like, and some Republicans feel like this is a good thing because it does take focus off the virus. It reminds some of Trump's base who have moved away from him why they supported him in the first place. It's something that they can be proactive about and say, oh, we're doing this thing. This is a key part of the Trump record, this judicial legacy. And it allows them to circumvent questions about the recession, the social unrest, how the White House is handling of the pandemic, Trump's taxes, all of these things that have been so negative for them and people are so unhappy about. And I think that's why we're seeing the low approval rating for the president. It allows them to sort of seize on this as a capstone of Trump's first term in time for the last debate.
And last thing, how big a deal are the Democrats making of this wing of Catholicism called People of Praise that they say Barrett is part of? I see one of your political colleagues wrote an article about how influential the group is in shaping the city of South Bend, Indiana. So maybe someone should ask Mayor Pete about this. But people's religious views are their own. They only become relevant if someone is trying to bend the law to conform their religion, violating separation of church and state in that direction, rather than being independently faithful to American civic law. Are the Dems making that case?
I think the Democrats really want the focus of the confirmation hearings to be healthcare. And I think that they are trying to steer clear of attacks that they view as more personal, whether it's the size of her family, whether it's, her own religion. Dianne Feinstein made some comments during her confirmation hearing for the circuit court judge, talking about how the dogma lives in her. And the White House was thrilled by that. They felt like it really riled up conservatives and made her a more sympathetic character. So I feel like the Democrats are going to tread very carefully on the subject of her religion this time around.
Nancy Cook, White House correspondent for Politico. Great job. Thank you so much.